Hello and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I am Jack Roney,
And I'm Harry Colfer.
and today's episode, we're really pleased to introduce our first international guest. Texas-based Michael Bracken is an award-winning writer of fiction, non-fiction, and advertising copy, and recipient of the Edward D. Hosch Memorial Golden Derringer Award for Lifetime Achievement in Short Mystery Fiction. The author of several books and more than 1,200 short stories, he has edited 28 published or forthcoming crime fiction anthologies. Michael regularly speaks about writing, editing, and publishing at conferences, conventions, and corporate seminars, and has taught writing courses at Southern Illinois University. He received a Bachelor of Arts in Professional Writing, and in June 2021 was named a prominent alumnus for his accomplishments as an award-winning mystery writer. Michael Bracken, welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. It's great to have you on board.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So I have to say, I'm amazed that you've managed to do 1,200 short stories. That is quite an achievement. I thought I was doing well when I did 32. So
yeah, I started young, so it's not like I did it last week. I actually started writing when I was a teenager. My first professionally published story, I wrote it when I was 17 and it was published when I was 21. And from then on, that's how you rack them up. You do this for a long time.
Yeah, okay.
And I guess that's a good segue. My first question, as we often do with our guests, is just to get a bit of a feel for what's kind of your journey in terms of what's your background and what led you to where you are today in terms of your writing career.
It basically started when I was very young. I was born in 57 and my parents divorced, and it was uncommon for a single mother to be raising a child alone back then. And we moved frequently. And one of the first things that we did was my mom found the nearest library and got a library card. So books and reading was an important part of my life. We didn't even have a television until I was in the third grade. So that started the path. With books, with reading, I could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. And at some point I realized people wrote these things. They just didn't appear magically. And in the 8th grade, I wrote a short story and I rushed to show it to my mother and said, I'm going to be a writer. And she got me a typewriter. And I figured that was an incentive because when I told her I wanted to be a fireman, I didn't see a Dalmatian dog or a fire engine. I said cowboy. I never saw a horse. So maybe there was some influence there. Maybe that's the direction she was heading me toward, or maybe it's the least expensive thing she could do for me. But that's basically how it started initially. And then I wrote, I guess the first actual thing published was in 9th grade, which was junior high here in the States. I had a poem in the junior high literary magazine. From there, high school, a newspaper, high school literary magazine. A friend and I started what was known as a science fiction fanzine. Way back in the day, science fiction fans would put together mimeographed publications or printed on Ditto Masters and share them with friends around the world. And so I got a taste of writing and editing that way. And then, like I said, I wrote my first professionally published story when I was 17. And, publishing grinds slowly. So it took 4 years for it to see print. So.
And what's your professional background? Did you had other professions, and over time has the writing become more of the professional that's your career, your life?
Writing and editing is my career in life now. Most of my jobs back in the day, I bounced between printing and publishing companies. I did typesetting, proofreading. Back before desktop publishing, I did page layout, whole lot of different things. I worked for some large publishing companies and some small ones, worked for various printing companies in various positions. And then over time, ultimately moved into from the production side to the editorial side. So for example, right now, one of my freelance gigs is editing a gardening magazine. So in addition to that, the anthologies, and I edit a mystery magazine, and just a combination of things. And that's basically where it was all leading to the same place, but a whole lot of different side paths along the basic path.
I think for a lot of writers or successful writers, it certainly does seem to be that the having that sort of grounding in the publishing industry and knowing the ropes and knowing how things work really does seem to help, because, and plus the fact you get contacts, you get to meet people, you get to sort of like talk the talk with respect to the whole process, let alone the creative side of things. There is, as you discover at the end of the day, there are quite a lot of other things other than actually just sitting there and writing.
Oh yeah, writing is an art, but publishing is a business, and there's a whole lot of steps to the business.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Michael, it sounds like you've pretty much you've immersed yourself in, if we call it the industry, whether it be editing, publishing, writing, from an early age. It sounds like you knew what you wanted to do, and you've pursued that. Would that be a fair comment to make?
That's a fair comment. I was sitting in a room with a typewriter, pounding the keyboards, while guys my age in high school were throwing the football, playing tennis, shooting baskets, whatever. I was pounding the keyboard because I knew what I wanted to do.
Yep. Yeah. That's great. Helps. And I guess, I suppose, like say Harry, who's a paramedic and is using his life experiences to influence his writing. With myself, I was a former police officer, and using my experiences to inform my writing. And I guess we've come into the writing gig sort of later in life. It's so encouraging to see someone like yourself who've made this writing thing a lifetime passion, that you've immersed so much of your heart and soul into it over so many years.
There's an advantage and a disadvantage to each way. You guys can come into it with a background. You don't have to do a lot of research. How does a police officer operate? How does a paramedic do it? Me, I have to go, oh, I gotta look that up. I have to research that. I can't just pound some words on the keyboard and think it's going to be believable, where you've got lived experiences that I don't have. So, there are advantages and disadvantages to each path.
And I guess that's interesting because I take your point, even though, say, Harry and I come from particular career paths where we're using that information to help writing, but also to make that big step from having the ideas and having the knowledge base to actually hone the craft of writing. I remember the first time I started writing, and I did it very secretively, because I was still a serving police officer, and I was thinking, what are people going to think of me if I start writing crime fiction as a serving police officer? So I did it covertly, and I did it for years without telling anyone. And I wrote this full manuscript, and I thought it was great. I thought, yeah, I've read all the James Patterson novels, and I can write just like, if James Patterson can do it, so can I. And it was awful when I started getting feedback. The head hopping and changing points of view, and just I thought I was writing a very good story, but I hadn't yet learnt the craft of writing. So I think it's a case of being able to merge both life experiences that inspire your stories, but you still need to learn the craft and the aspects of good writing. And is that something you've just honed your skills over periods of time, or through formal learnings as well?
I mostly learned it by pounding the keyboard and sending manuscripts out. I did not have a lot of formal education in writing. I got lucky though when I was young, in that I don't know if it was just me or if editors were more gracious, might be a good word, is I would get rejection letters that weren't form letters. I got a fair share of those, but sometimes I get 2 or 3 handwritten paragraphs. I got rejection letters that were a page, 2 pages, typewritten letters. Editors obviously took time to tell me what was wrong and to encourage me to go. Those lessons, you don't get those in a classroom. You don't get those from your critique group. The real life editor who has the ability to buy or reject your story is saying, they see something there and they tell you, here's how you fix it. One of my biggest breaks, actually, I had sent a science fiction story to a men's magazine. That's one of those magazines with naked pictures in it. But they also publish, let's call it straight fiction. And he liked the story. He completely rewrote it and retyped it, and then returned it. So the publisher didn't want science fiction. So I looked at what he had done, how he had restructured it, how he had rewritten it. And I had a story on the corner of my desk I'd stopped work on. At that point in my career, I just wanted to write science fiction. But I had a story that was about 1.5 pages, and I go, it was a mystery, so I'd stopped working on it. So I took what the lessons I could learn from that rewritten manuscript and wrote a mystery, and he bought it. And I wrote another mystery, and he bought it. And I wrote a third mystery, and another magazine bought it. And I go, okay, maybe science fiction isn't where I'm going. And one interesting thing is the story that he rewrote, the magazine was sold to another publisher with another editor, and that editor bought it and paid me more than he would have paid me. So, those are those weird things that happen in publishing. But yeah.
And it goes to show too the importance of those rejections. We've all had them, but when you can get that feedback and you can take on board that feedback, I guess that's where the learning is, isn't it? Is to expect that yes, you are going to get rejections, but if the editors do take the time to give you that feedback, take that feedback on board, learn from it, and develop through that advice.
Well, absolutely. Because like I said, if they have the power to accept your work, take their comments with seriousness. You may not agree with them all, but try to figure out why they made the comment.
I think there is a danger these days, though, that because everything is so that the margins are all so tight and everything else, so often now publishers are literally just the only thing you get is, well, if you haven't heard from us in 3 to 6 months, then you haven't been successful. You don't even get the rejection letter. So you can't even do the JK Rowling of posting them all over over a wall because you just don't get the letter. And that obviously is a potential sort of loss of learning for new authors.
There's very definitely some of that. And it's also, I think, a little bit, social media has made some editors leery, because if you write a letter to an author, that may show up on somebody's social media feed and it's meant just for that author. And then you go, oh, do I really want this out there in public? And what makes sense in that context doesn't make sense if you don't know the context. And it gets very, very delicate. I know as an editor, I'm a little more reluctant now that I've seen things show up and that weren't meant to show up in public. It's unfortunate, but it's the world we live in now.
I'd like to delve into your focus on writing short stories. You've already sort of touched on how that journey began, and you started with sci-fi, and then you were getting picked up for other styles of writing, and so that's what you went with. So my question more is, I know you've also done long form writing as well, but it sounds like that you've decided, or it just so happened that short stories is your thing, and that's become your expertise. Was that a conscious decision, or did it just sort of organically turn out that way? That short stories is where your focus is.
Let's call it a decision by circumstance. Early on, when I wrote novels, what I found is I was making more money from the short stories than the novels. I had some short stories that have earned more than some of my novels have earned, even after royalties over the years. And it was a matter of how much time do I have? I have X amount of time. If I can write 6, 10, 12 short stories and probably sell most of them, I'm going to make more money. And back then I had young kids and, car payments and house payments and all that stuff. And so financially, it just made more sense. And over time, the more you write in any genre, or the more you write short, the better you get at it. Better you get at, the more you do it. And it just becomes like a hamster wheel. You do more, you get better. You do more, you get better. And it's at some point along the line, I realized I might not ever write another novel. I've got a couple that I've toyed with, but just the time commitment just doesn't make sense anymore.
Hey, I've got a question for you, Harry. So I know you may not be aware of this, Michael, but Harry's won a couple of prestigious awards for short story submissions. So have you? I know, Harry, you're pursuing. I know you've got your 3-book series. You've got other works underway. Do you think you will ever move into, given that you've had some successful competitions in short stories, do you think you'll ever move into that?
I think the way that I tend to run it at the moment is that there's a novel in the background bubbling along, so that's a sort of, but the advantage with short stories, and certainly short story competitions, is they have a deadline. The novel doesn't have a deadline, especially for me, because I'm a self-publisher, and so I set the deadline, and I set these sort of deadlines, and I want this one out this year, so it has to be done by November. All done and dusted and printed by November. So I've set my own goals for a word count per day. But on top of that, I look for competitions to enter. And the competitions are invariably, because of time constraints, they're going to be short stories. And, you got the microfiction, you got the nanofiction, and all those little competitions help. You're throwing your hat in the ring for potentially winning something. But the other thing is, it just hones the craft. And as I'm sure Michael would attest, is that short stories require that you've got to be succinct. You've got to get the whole sort of that novel worth of you can't waffle. You've got to get it tight. You've got to get it sort of to the point that it grabs the reader and then sort of gives them the story and then ties it all up in a really nice, neat package. And that helps train you in writing, any form of writing, because you've got to get that sort of context and everything all sorted out very quickly. So basically, I do both.
Absolutely. One of the advantages, whether it's a competition or it's a call for short stories from an anthology, they give you a theme, or they give you a setting, or they give you some starting point. And then the important thing is they give you a deadline, and learning to write the deadline can be extremely beneficial.
Yeah.
Early in a writing career, when you haven't sold anything, you've sold very little, and you're just kind of flinging it out there and hoping somebody picks it up, is a whole different attitude than go, okay, I need 5,000 words by Thursday. I'm 3,000 words in. It's time to get going. And learning, I think in some senses, journalists have an advantage over the rest of us, because their entire career is writing to deadlines.
Yeah.
They just have to switch from nonfiction to fiction, or usually nonfiction to fiction.
It depends on which newspaper it is. We've got some newspapers here where arguably I think some of the headlines are fiction, but anyway.
Yeah, we've got a few of those.
I won't name the actual newspaper, but it'll say, "Is it true, or did you read it in the certain name of newspaper?"
I do have to say that I'm hazarding a guess here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a massive advantage in America for the number of competitions that you can enter, because it seems that there's, because of the population base, etc., etc. I've now I'd stumbled across New York City Midnight competition. That's a sort of a short story competition. And from that, I then stumbled across writing battles, and now the latest one I'm doing is Twist in the Tail, and all of them are that style where basically they say, here you go, write 1,000 words. The competition is you've got 7 days to write 1,000-word short story in this genre with this character and this subject. So you're given the sort of like basis of what they want, and you get on and write it. And at the end of the day, the advantage is you're in the ring for $1,000, which you'd never see in Australia. That sort of sort of winning potential is great.
Yeah. Dollar figure is a good incentive.
Yeah. I mean, I say it does happen in Australia because that's one of the ones I won. But it's rare. It's rare, and you've got so many more opportunities. And they're doing the writing battles one. It's like they'll do that, a couple of times. Well, I think they do 4 a year. And you're up against quite a lot of writers. I think the last one there was something like 1,200 or 1,900 writers. So you are up against a lot of people, but it's still it helps with honing the craft.
Absolutely. Anything that gets you to the keyboard is beneficial.
And I do have to ask, do you still use a typewriter?
No, I write usually directly on the computer.
Yeah.
I know we've already started talking about the specifics of short story writing, and Harry touched on it, the fact that you need to be very concise. But a question for you, Michael, is how would you describe the fundamental differences between long form writing and short story writing? We can delve into maybe the specific crafts shortly, but in terms of, for anyone, any emerging writers who are toying with, should I invest my time in writing a full length novel, or should I focus on short stories?
One of the key differences is the length, but more importantly is why the length. A novel allows you to go off on various subplots, various side paths, and then come back to your main storyline. A short story is usually, not always, but usually a single idea expressed. So you have a theme, or you have a point you're trying to make, a literary point you're trying to make, and what you're trying to do is tell that story as well as you can. And you don't have the time to toss in a half a dozen extra characters and 34 scenes that are only vaguely related. You have to really be concise. So the advantages and disadvantages are partly how you see things. If you're a big picture person, you're probably a novelist. If you're a detail person, you're probably a short story writer, or at least you would tend towards one or the other.
Yeah. I think one of the things that short stories definitely help train you in is that when I first started out, I got a lot of this, show, don't tell. And I had to actually Google it because I hadn't a clue what people were talking about. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think that when you start learning how to write short stories, you have to rely on that show, because you don't have the time to tell. You've got to do a lot of implications in the way you write and describe people, because you don't have the word count to actually get too verbose about it and go on too much. You've got to do a lot of implication, and that really does help with the show, not tell.
Absolutely. A character description in a short story, you may have one sentence and you have to pack a lot into that sentence. In a novel, you might get 3 or 4 pages to describe your character and learn all about his history and where he was born and where he went to school and all his friends and his mates and his pets, and which may or may not be important later. But in a short story, you got to figure out what's the most important thing about that character and put it in that one sentence you get.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's amazing how authors can do that so effectively. As you say, Michael, with a novel, your character development's like stripping away layers of an onion. Sometimes you don't really get to discover the true depth of a character. It's a slow reveal. Whereas with a short story, as you say, it might be one particular attribute, color of the hair, their physique. I think I remember I described a character as a caricature of George from Seinfeld, something like that, like some sort of comparison, and straight away it forms an image in the reader's mind. So one sentence or a few key words can be enough just to describe that character in the mind of the reader.
A physical description. You've got a character with an eye patch. In a novel, you would explain what happened to his eye and all the accidents. But in the short story, he's a guy with an eye patch, and that alone makes him go, okay, I don't know what happened to this guy, but I'm going to be leery of him.
I did a recent short story, and I literally just said that she had an athletic build and had got the nickname Lara, and from that, everyone knows what she looks like, and you got it in about 8 words, and you don't have to go anything further. so
exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe, I guess the next question, and we're starting to touch on the specifics, Michael, if you were to give some people, writers, some advice around what are the rules around the craft of writing short stories in terms of advice, what would they be?
I'm not sure there's hard and fast rules, but there are some general things that you should keep in mind as you're crafting a short story. Is what's the point? Why are you including certain bits of information in the story? It goes back, was it Chekhov said something about in a play, if there's a shotgun over the mantle in the first scene, somebody better fire it before the end of the play. Well, what I see in a lot of beginning writers is they'll toss in stuff like that, and you go, what happened to it? Where'd it go? Why is it mentioned if you're not going to use it? Yeah. So you have to think through various set pieces, descriptions. If a significant character has the eye patch and you make a big deal about it, how does that eye patch come into play later in the story? Is it going to be significant in some way? Maybe he's not really blind in the eye, it's a fake. That's a twist. But why is it there? So that's very important. The other thing is that your story should generally have an actual beginning, a middle, and an end. What happened, why it happened, and what the end result is. Sometimes ends are like a bit nebulous, like the classic story, The Lady and the Tiger. You don't know which door the character actually picked, but there's an ending. You see a probable resolution there. And sometimes you don't have to specify what happens, like in that story, but you gave the reader enough information that as they get to the end, they can decide what happens or what the result going forward for that character is. Characters in a short story usually have some sort of a character arc. They have a problem, they address the problem. Same with a novel. Things get worse before they get better. Or in a noir, things are okay and they get better and then they get worse and it ends. So those are some important things. In terms of how many words, well, they can pretty much be anything if you're telling the story. A fairly common range is probably 3,500 to 5,000, mostly from a publishing standpoint. The magazines that like really long stories, 3,500 words would be near their bottom end. Magazines that like really short stories, 3,500 words might be at their top end. So filling a niche in the market, that's a pretty good length, and it's long enough for character development, plot, setting, and all of that. But it's not a hard and fast rule. With microfiction and shorts and novellas, you want to tell the story in the length that it takes to tell the story, and temper that with who are you writing it for. If you're writing for a specific contest or a specific anthology call, they tell you what the maximum length is or what the minimum length is. And then you have to take your idea and adjust to that, which leads into the next most important thing is if you're submitting, read guidelines, which is the most common problem I see in stuff that gets submitted to my publications is the authors, the writers aren't reading the guidelines. So they're giving me stuff that's too long or in the wrong genre or too short, or, it's really important to read those guidelines and understand them. And let's admit it, some editors don't write good guidelines, but that can't be helped. But try your best to meet the guidelines.
Yeah. I think it's always for short stories, is certainly microfiction, which is the 500 to 1,000, is you've got to start the short story with at least a decent hook, something that's going to get the reader to read the rest of it. And it is only a short story, so most of them will actually read it. But it's that to win competitions, it's that that first paragraph, you hit the reader with something important, which then goes, "Ooh, I want to read the rest of this." And that's
absolutely
that's when you're targeting the judges more than the actual reader, because the judges are the ones that are going to be saying, "Yeah, I want to read this," whereas the reader will probably read it anyway because it's only short. But yeah, I think for competitions, that first paragraph is very important.
You have to get the reader into it. Now that hook could be different depending on your genre. If you're writing hard-boiled mystery fiction, you want a little action, maybe a fist fight, somebody pulls out a gun. But if you're writing horror fiction, maybe your first paragraph is very slow moving, but it's very descriptive and evocative. So just because a hook works in one genre isn't necessarily right for another genre. But you also have to have the payoff at the end. You can have a great hook, but if it just falls flat at the end, now you've just, it's one thing to say, "Oh, I don't want to read this because there's no hook," but it's worse if they get to the end and go, "Why'd I bother?"
Very good point.
You better still have them at the end.
I really like that advice around the hook differs depending on the genre, but also the ending, as you say. The short stories that I remember are the ones where you get to the very end, whether it's that sudden twist or maybe it's the final words suddenly shift the intention or the meaning of the story, and you go, for example, stories where the protagonist is talking about they're seeing ghosts, and then right at the very end you discover that in fact they're a ghost and everyone else are living people, things like that. Those we've probably all seen those stories and movies.
I see dead people everywhere.
Yes. Yes, that one comes to mind.
That's a common said phrase with paramedics, by the way, but that's an aside.
Or the one, the stories that, as you said, Michael, that maybe the resolution isn't completely articulated. It's very much for the reader to interpret. And then maybe those stories that make you go away and think about it for a while. And then after some thought and processing, it starts to make sense, even to the point where you think, I need to reread that with a new lens now that I've got a better understanding. Is that something that you sort of work towards as well with your own writing?
That's the goal. I wish I hit it with every story, but that's definitely the goal. You want the reader to finish the story. For me, I like it when a reader feels something at the end, whether it's elation or whether it's sadness or whatever it is. I like, and I like that also as an editor. If I feel something when I've read this story, it's that much better. There are writers who write great stories, great twists, great classic clue ending resolutions, and you can enjoy the imagination that came up where they turned a corgi and a parrot and a #2 pencil into the clues that solve the crime, and that's clever. But if you don't feel anything, all it is clever. So if you can get an emotional resonance that the reader feels, that just adds a whole layer that benefits you as a writer, benefits the reader.
And can I ask, Michael, what influences your stories? Is it life experiences? Are you an observer of the world and little things, daily interaction? Do you think, oh, that would make for a great story? Interaction between people. You observe something. Are your story ideas propagating continually?
Oh, absolutely. I get story ideas from everything around me, people I see, things I hear. But sometimes though it's the call for submission from an anthology or an editor asks for something. And then I have to go, well, what can I do that fits within that realm? I've written a few stories the past couple of years for anthologies, for stories, crime fiction based on the songs of the Beatles, stories based on the songs of Jimmy Buffett, stories based on the songs of Joni Mitchell. And I've written for several of those. And so what you have to do is you have to find the inspiration from the song. What is in the song? And then you go, sometimes you can pull things from your life and that you've seen and heard. Sometimes you just have to go with raw imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just amazing where those story ideas can come from. Now, over the years, you've diversified. You've written, I guess, across a number of different genres. Is there a fallback, a go-to that you will always return to as your preferred genre of writing?
I pretty much always return to crime fiction, mystery fiction, mostly hard-boiled and private eye. But the past few years, I've been trying to diversify into the other subgenres. I've written a couple of traditional mysteries. I've come close to writing a cozy. It didn't quite fit the cozy, but I was aiming for it. So because what you do is, even if you stay within the general genre of mystery fiction, the markets are a little bit different. So that hard-boiled, hard-hitting, guns blazing story isn't going to fit all the markets. So I've been trying to expand what subgenres, but I've written for women's magazines, I've written erotica, I've written science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And if I have an idea, I will go off in that direction. But these days, almost everything fits in some subgenre of mystery fiction, crime fiction.